1800s were a time of discovery and invention. Medical advancements and traditions were being created, such as the first baseball game. In Amherst, Massachusetts, during this time of growth, Emily Dickinson was born in 1830 on December 10th. After attending Mount Holyoke College and Amherst College, she developed an eye injury and rarely left home. Being a shut-in, she wrote nearly 2,000 poems despite her sickness. There was only one known picture of Emily in her teenage years. I guess she was shy and not photogenic. Later, though, another photo was discovered that people assume is Emily Dickinson in her 20s or 30s. She is sitting to the left with her arm extended behind her friend Kate Scott Turner, who had recently become a widow. Unfortunately, Emily Dickinson died on May 15th in 1886 from Bright's disease, and wasn't very popular while she was alive, but became very famous after her death. She served as inspiration to poets for generations to come and was one of America's early female poets, allowing females to get into the literary world. Back in those times, illness we see nowadays as minor were seen as very severe and dangerous. Emily was very weak in her life and had gotten very sick and even close to death a few times. In her poems, she expresses this in her dark scenarios, talking about death and immortality, heart sickness, nature, life, and love. Though many of her poems were dreary and depressing, many of them end with a bit of hope. Emily was brought up in a strict Calvinist home that focused heavily on the concept of original sin. Astonishingly, especially considering her quiet nature, she openly questioned Calvinistic principles. Though a religious woman, she questioned original sin and showed a deep exploration of spirituality in her poems. She portrays the importance and emphasis of nature, which is a main characteristic of Romanticism. The Puritans believed nature to be the realm of the devil. By including references to nature in many of her poems, she was rebelling against the ideals of the Puritan upbringing she had hated so much. Although she never won any awards herself for her poems, there is an award named after Miss Dickinson, which is given to a member of the Poetry Society of America each year, the Emily Dickinson Award. Many people have different opinions on what Emily's most famous poems are, being titled with their first sentences because Emily generally didn't title any of her work. I believe the most famous ones are I Am Nobody, Who Are You, A Bird Came Down the Walk, and Because I Could Not Stop for Death. The poem Because I Could Not Stop for Death is kind of melancholic in the way it's accepting the outcome of reality, while still maintaining a sense of sadness and loss, and reveals peace. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather he passed us. The dews grew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only told. Before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground, the roof was scarcely visible, the cornice but a mound. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet each feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horse's head were toward eternity. This poem is about the journey of death. In the first stanza, she states, Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. And leading into the next stanza, we slowly drove, he knew no haste, explaining that she was in no hurry and that they were taking their time. In the third stanza, she talks about things from life. Some people interpret this as her life going by. Others think it's the stages of death. For example, at recess in the ring as birth or childhood, and the setting sun as death. I personally think that it shows the stages of life because after we pass the setting sun, it says, or rather he passed us, which supports the idea that death is unpredictable. Later in the poem, it states that they came to a house, but by saying a swelling of the ground and the cornice but a mound, it's actually depicting a grave. But they only paused at the house and eventually moved on. She also explains that it's been centuries and yet each feels shorter than the day. So she's basically saying that it feels like time is moving extremely slow, showing immortality and that she's been dead for a long time. Toward eternity in the final stanza also supports this. Although she wasn't very active or popular in her lifetime, after her death, her dark poems became an inspiration to everyone for centuries to come.